Alright, in this video we're going to be talking about a theory of well-being called hedonism, and I'm going to be presenting a contemporary version of hedonism, which is a bit different from older versions of hedonism, which go all the way back to ancient Greek. So before we get into hedonism, I want to talk about what theories of well-being try to explain. So think about some of the things that are good for you, that benefit you, that make your life go well. Things like friendship, having a good job, relationships, having a hobby. So all kinds of things are good for us. But why ultimately are all those things good for us and make our lives go well? So that's what a theory of well-being tries to identify. Theories of well-being attempt to state what it is for a life to go well and what kind of things will make that life go better. So one reason I like to study theories of well-being is there's a lot of practical application. And it's something that I think most of us care about. We want our lives to go well. So I think it would be good to take a look at some of those theories, or at least one of those theories. And again, just in a nutshell, theories of well-being try to attempt to explain what ultimately or fundamentally benefits us. So again, you can ask, well, all these other things benefit us, but why do they benefit us? Well, because it gets us some particular thing, this very basic and fundamental. And so that anything that's good for us is good for us because it brings us this thing or things. To put this a different way, more technical way, theories of well-being try to specify what is intrinsically good for us. So let me talk a little bit about this idea of intrinsic goodness. So to understand intrinsic value or intrinsic goodness, same, we can compare it with instrumental good or instrumental value. So things that are instrumentally valuable are valuable just because they get us something else that's good. So money, for example, is instrumentally valuable. It's valuable, but only because it can bring us other things that are valuable. And most things that are valuable are instrumentally valuable. So good, healthy food is valuable, but just because it brings us other things that are valuable, like more energy, more well-being, prevents illness. And so food, or healthy food, is instrumentally valuable. And that's, again, how it goes for most things. Now, let's say we start with money. And we think, okay, why is money valuable? Well, it gets us all these other things that are valuable. Well, like what? Well, money gets us opportunities to go on vacation. And that's good. Well, why is that good? Well, because it helps us relax and de-stress, recharge our batteries, and all those things are good. But then you can ask, well, why are those things good? And somewhere you're going to bottom out in that chain of explanation. And one way of approaching a theory of well-being is to figure out where does that chain of explanation bottom out or terminate. And that's where we'll find what is intrinsically valuable for us. Now, some theories will say it's just one thing. Others, more pluralistic theories, will say it's multiple basic things. So something that is intrinsically valuable for us is valuable for us for its own sake. It's intrinsic, it's valuable, it's good for us independent of whether it gets us something else that's valuable. And examples of this, it's controversial what is intrinsically valuable, and this is a big issue in philosophy. But let's look at what hedonism has to say. So just to start, there are many different theories of well-being. There's perfectionism, there's desire satisfaction theory, there's objective list theory, and then there's hedon. So I'm just going to talk about hedonism because I think it's a very intuitive, powerful theory, yet at the same time there's very good and interesting objections to the theory, which we'll get to. So according to hedonism, when we ask those questions, well, why is money valuable? Why is vacation valuable? Why is de-stressing valuable? Why is health valuable? So on and so on and so on. You're going to bottom out with happiness. You're going to terminate with happiness. So for the hedonists, what fundamentally makes our life go well, what fundamentally benefits us, is happiness. Very straightforward. So happiness is the only thing that is intrinsically good for us, And so anything that's good for us is good for us to the degree or the extent that it makes us happy, at least in the long run. And so the other side of the coin is that misery is the only thing that is intrinsically bad for us. And so for the hedonist, a life goes well to the extent that it's a life full of happiness and free of misery. But let me give you some caveats here, or be a little bit more specific. Let's start with the distinction between what we might call physical pleasure and attitudinal pleasure, so we can get a better understanding of what hedonism is saying. So physical pleasure are pleasant feelings, pleasant sensations, the taste of chocolate cake, the sensation of sitting in a nice hot tub and relaxing. Whereas attitudinal pleasure is more of an attitude rather than a physical sensation. It may involve a physical sensation, but it's an attitude. It's a positive attitude of enjoyment. For example, seeing your home team win a victory, looking at a beautiful painting, reading a good story, something like this. And this is what the hedonist basically means by happiness. There's a lot of work on what exactly happiness is, but it's more or less something like this. And I think that's enough for us to move forward. So the important point here is that for contemporary hedonism, it's not pleasure that makes a life go well. That's like more ancient hedonism. Rather, for the contemporary hedonist, it is happiness that makes a life go well. So I want to start by looking at some of the attractions to hedonism, and then we'll move into some interesting objections. We'll talk about 3 objections. But first, the attractions for hedonism. Well, one attraction is that hedonism accommodates many different models of a good life. So a model isn't a standard, rather it's something that will apply the standard of hedonism. So different kinds of lives can be just as good as the other. There's a lot of flexibility in living a good life. If you want to be a kind of bohemian that moves around a lot, maybe never has kids, an artist, and that life can go great as long as it makes you happy. On the other side, if you want to live, say, a more traditional life, marriage, kids, and white picket fence, that can be a life that goes well for you too, as long as you're happy. So that's what we mean when we say hedonism accommodates many models of a good life, and that seems to be an attraction to the theory. There's also some personal authority concerning well-being. One might say that what makes you happy is up to you. So it's kind of up to me to live a good life, and it's kind of up to me of what makes my life go well. There's also a lot of intuitive plausibility, and just by this we just mean it's very commonsensical, a lot of common sense appeal. It's just pretty clear that misery is bad for us, and a life that's utterly miserable didn't go that well. So a lot of intuitive plausibility. Happiness clearly improves our lives. Another attraction to hedonism is that it has a lot of explanatory power for why all these other things are good for us. Why is exercise, health, friends, why are all these things good for us? Why do they benefit us? Well, because they make us happy. So it's a pretty strong and simple explanation for why the goods of life are the goods of life for us. Another attraction to hedonism is that it can justify many rules of the good life. These common sense rules that seem intuitively appealing, hedonism can ground those rules, justify those rules. So most of us know more or less what the things we need in our life to make them go well. Like, you make good friends, you get an interesting job, and hedonism can justify these and saying, well, they're good for us because they ultimately make us happy. And another attraction to hedonism is that it's generally what we want for our loved ones. Often parents will say, I just want my kids to be happy, right? And that lends support to hedonism. But let's segue into a problem. So as a segue, so this is not one of the objections we're going to talk about, but just a segue into the objections. So would you want to make your loved one lobotomized, if this would make them happy. So imagine a person who maybe has a lot of problems with anxiety or whatever, some mental health problems, and a doctor says, if we just lobotomize this person, they'll be content, like a clam. Most of us would say, even so, we wouldn't want to lobotomize our loved one. Lobotomy is when you remove the frontal lobe in the brain and basically kind of turn them into a zombie. So what this is saying is that maybe this theory can only go so far. Maybe there are some problems with the theory. So let's take a look at 3 objections to hedonism. So the first objection in the book, it's called the evil pleasures objection. And before I sort of put out the objection in step-by-step form, I'm just going to give an informal explanation. So imagine someone who is a sociopath, psychopath, and what makes them happy is killing people for fun and torturing animals on Tuesday every week. And they do this, and it just makes them so happy. And they get away with it. They never get caught or anything like that. They're able to get away with it, and then they live their life, killing a handful of people, torturing a bunch of animals, and then they die. And it's a happy, happy life. According to hedonism, that life went well. That life was full of well-being for the person. It was full of benefit for the person. It was a good life. But surely that seems like at least an odd thing to say. That seems kind of problematic. It doesn't seem like, in this case, happiness that comes from evil deeds is good. So let's get the objection down in step-by-step form. So if hedonism is true, then happiness that comes from evil deeds is just as good as happiness that comes from kind and decent actions. Again, if hedonism is true, all that matters is the happiness. Doesn't matter where it comes from. But this is just this isn't true. So happiness that comes from evil deeds, it's not as good as happiness that comes from decent or kind deeds, and so hedonism is false. So we've got the objection up there pretty clearly, and the general consensus is that this may not work, I would say. It's actually not a very strong objection, and here's why, and it'll illustrate an important point for the hedonists. The first premise is true, so the second premise is what we need to take a look at. The first premise is true by definition. That's just what hedonism states. The problem with the second premise is that it equivocates moral goodness, ethical goodness, like right action, with what is good for us, what you might call prudential goodness. So when I say this is good for me, I'm talking about what is in my interest, and for the hedonist, what brings me happiness. So it's a different sense of the word good. This premise is using another sense of the word good in just the ethical sense, like, oh, he is a good person, he did the right thing, the good thing, and that's where this objection goes wrong. So technically speaking, it commits the fallacy of equivocation, mixing up two different meanings of the same word. A little bit more explanation here. So we have to keep in mind that hedonism is a theory of well-being. It's not a moral theory. It's not telling us what's right or wrong. It's only telling us what fundamentally benefits people. And so for the hedonist, yes, you could be an evil person, but live a good life only in the sense that it's full of well-being and benefit for you, in theory at least. And this is why when the evildoer gets caught, we're so satisfied, because it's breaking their happiness that they get from doing their evil deeds. So the reason why this objection fails is because it kind of misses the mark. It's assuming that hedonism talks about moral good when it's not talking about moral good at all. It's only talking about what is good for us, what is prudent for us, what benefits us. Okay, so let's move on to the second objection. In the book, and the Schaefer-Lando text here, this is the supplementary text, he calls it the false happiness objection. So we're just going to call it objection 2. So let's start out with a couple thought experiments. So the famous thought experiment here that illustrates this point was made by Robert Nozick, where he is criticizing hedonism, and he's trying to show that something at least besides happiness matters for making a life go well. So imagine this. Okay, so imagine this. We have two people, person A, I'm trying to draw with the mouse, it's hard, and person B, bear with me. And they live their life. So this person lives a life, and let's say it's just a normal life, living out there in the world. And let's say that life has 10 units of happiness in it. So altogether, when you add up how much happiness is in this life, it's 10. This person also lives a happy life, and they also altogether have 10 units of happiness in their life. But this person is plugged into an experience machine. And the experience machine is kind of like the Matrix. It mimics reality. They don't know they're in the experience machine. And so they live their whole life in a virtual reality. Now, if hedonism is true, then these lives go equally as well. But many people would say, that just doesn't seem right. It really seems like this life goes better, the life of the person living in real reality, because their happiness is based off of reality. It's based off of truth, true beliefs. This life is based off of a whole bunch of false beliefs that they think they're in reality, but they're just in a virtual reality that's pumping information into their brain, again, like the Matrix. And so if hedonism is true, then these lives go equally as well, but surely this life goes better. Here's another way of casting the objection. Let's say that this life goes a little bit better, has a little bit more happiness in it. So what this means is that since the source of the happiness does not matter for the hedonist, this life actually goes better than the life in real reality rather than virtual reality. And a lot of people think that that's intuitively implausible, that just doesn't seem right. That seems like the source of the belief matters. The belief needs to be based in reality for it to have more worth. A similar kind of idea, this is kind of, it's a thought experiment, a bit sci-fi. A more relatable kind of case would be, imagine these two people and they're both in a relationship, and the relationship matters a lot to them, a romantic relationship. The first person believes that their partner is being true to them, and they are, and they have a great relationship, and they have 10 units of happiness, and that's that. Okay, now the other person, the relationship matters a lot, and they believe that the person is being true to them, but they're actually not. And so for the whole duration of the relationship till they both die, this person's partner is cheating on them the whole time. Nevertheless, the person is happy, just as happy as the other, but that happiness is based off of a lie. It's based off of false beliefs. And a lot of people would say, well, that happiness seems to have less worth to it. It just seems like the person who's living in reality and is in tune with reality, whose beliefs and happiness are based off of reality, lives a better life. One of the just interesting issues that this raises is, what is the value of truth for you? What if the truth makes you miserable? Is it still valuable? And people who say truth matters in this way will say that life where the love is based in, the belief is based in reality, and the happiness is based in reality, goes better, even if it's the same amount of happiness. All right, so that's what we can call the false happiness objection. So let's go ahead and get that objection down in step-by-step form just to get it nice and clear. So premise one, If hedonism is true, then our lives go well to the extent that we are happy. So that's just true by definition of what hedonism is. Premise 2, however, it's not the case that our lives go well to the extent that we are happy. Those whose happiness is based on false beliefs, like the person in the experience machine, have worse lives than those whose happiness is based on true beliefs, even if both are equally happy. Therefore, hedonism is false. So let's move on to the third and final objection. So the argumentative strategy that we're seeing here with objecting to hedonism is to see if we can come up with a case where we have two lives that have equal amounts of happiness and so go equally as well according to hedonism, and yet intuitively they really seem like one goes better than the other. And if we can show that, then there's at least something in addition to or independent of happiness that makes a life go well. We saw it in the last objection, which seems to suggest that the source of happiness matters. Let's look at another way of taking that argumentative strategy. So this is called the life's trajectory objection. I'm just going to call it objection 3. Okay, so this is the third objection, and it's going to take that argumentative strategy that I mentioned. So imagine we have two lives, life A and life B. So this is a graph. We're going to make a graph here. So the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is how much happiness or misery. So the further up you go from the 0, the more happiness the person has at any particular time. And the further down they go from the 0, the more misery they have at some particular time. So let's take a look at life A. So this life begins in misery, absolute misery, born into dire poverty with illness and sickness and death. But this person, through a lot of luck and a lot of hard work, starts to improve their life. And they get happier and happier as they live. By middle age, they're getting happy, and then they live to be 95 years old, and they die extremely happy, surrounded by loved ones. So this is a success story, a kind of success, triumphant story, where it starts low, ends high, starts with misery, ends with lots of happiness. Okay, so that's A, life A. Life B, imagine, begins with lots of happiness. Maybe this person is born into a loving family, he has lots of opportunity and so on, but through a series of bad luck, misfortunes, maybe this person gets, something tragic happens, and then this person maybe gets addicted to drugs, and by middle age starts to become miserable, and everything just spirals down, and this person dies absolutely miserable in a gutter somewhere. So a tragic story. Okay. The first thing to notice about these two lives is they actually contain equal amounts of happiness and misery. The difference is when those amounts occur. For life A, the happiness is more later in life. For B, the happiness is more earlier in life. But that shouldn't matter if hedonism is true. If hedonism is true, a life goes well to the extent that it's full of happiness and free of misery. And so these two lives, if hedonism is true, go equally well. Again, because they contain equal amounts of happiness to misery. But you may be thinking, oh, wait a minute, like if I had to choose which life to live, I would choose this one. No doubt about it. And that suggests that this life goes better than this life. The success story goes better than the tragic story, even though they contain equal amounts of happiness to misery. And if this is true, that this A goes better than B, then that's a problem for hedonism. It suggests that something at least besides happiness matters with regards to making your life go well for what fundamentally benefits us. And we can speculate as to what this thought experiment, what this objection suggests that might be. So maybe you might say maybe happiness matters, but maybe also the story of one's life matters. And that can lead into a kind of narrative view of well-being, that a life that goes well is a life that has a certain narrative structure, something like that. Okay, so let's get objection 3, also called the life's trajectory objection, up on the screen just to get it clear. So first premise, if hedonism is true, then the overall quality of a life depends entirely on the amount of happiness and unhappiness it contains. But the overall quality of life depends on at least one other factor, whether the life reflects an upward trajectory or a downward trajectory. Where the happiness happens in life, therefore hedonism is false. So the first premise is true just by definition of what hedonism is. And the second premise is, according to the objection, true because of what we just saw in those two diagrams. It seems like this other thing matters. Okay, so that's it for hedonism. Just to recap real quick, hedonism is a theory of well-being. It's not a moral theory that tells us what's right or wrong. Hedonism is a theory that tells us what well-being is, or what well-being is constituted by. And for hedonism, that is happiness, not pleasure, because we're talking about contemporary hedonism. So according to hedonism, anything that's good for us, anything that benefits us to the degree that it makes us happy, at least in the long run. You can look at the long run here. And then we looked at those 3 objections that you need to know. All right.